Alright, today I'm going to be rating VSTs, which ones are the best, which ones are the worst. I'm going to decide. Feel free to head down to the comment section right off the bat and tell me how wrong I am right now. Might as well get that out of the way. This is going to be from the perspective of a beat maker. Which plugins are best for making beats and which ones should you consider if you want to make beats yourself? I'm going to be making my decisions based on 3 factors. Price, which is how expensive each of these plugins are in relation to each other. Second is ease of use, meaning how easy is it to actually find a good sound in the plugin and manipulate it, and also really understand what's actually going on in the plugin itself. And third is going to be utility. How useful is it for actual beat making? My channel is geared towards beat making, so if I find a plugin that has sounds that are more towards EDM or dance, for example, it's going to get a lower score. Alright, so let's start. First plugin we're going to look at is Serum. The price for Serum is $189, I believe, and I don't really see it ever go on sale. In terms of the ease of use, the interface can be a little bit daunting compared to other VSTs, but overall it's not too confusing. There's a decent amount of sounds in Serum, and it also allows you to manipulate those sounds pretty easily. You just gotta change a few parameters, which is nice. Like I said, it can be a bit confusing and daunting right off the bat, but once you get used to it, it's pretty easy to use. In terms of the utility, I will say the sounds are a little bit more geared towards electronic music. So in that regard, it can be a little bit limiting. The good thing is though, it allows for resynthesis, so you can drag your own sample inside of Serum and play around with it, which is nice. But what's really good about Serum is that you can use it as an effects tool as well. If you have a loop or you're using a completely different VST, what you can do is go into your mixer channel and throw Serum on top of it. You can go through the presets and quickly add some pretty experimental effects on top, so that's really useful when it comes to using Serum. And so for that reason, I'm gonna give this a B grade. Next up is Massive, which costs around $200. In terms of its ease of use, I would say this thing's probably pretty low. It's pretty straightforward to choose a preset, but beyond that, trying to adjust and change different parameters to change your sound can be really confusing. This is one of the first synths I ever used, and it was like jumping into the deep end of a pool. It was just really confusing to understand what was going on in the plugin itself. I'd say the utility is pretty low as well. You can find some pretty cool presets inside of Massive, but beyond that, trying to manipulate it can be really difficult. As well, a lot of the sounds are geared towards electronic music, so as this is a beat making channel, it's just not going to be as useful for a lot of people. Therefore, I'm going to give this a C ranking. Next up, we're going to look at Silent One, which is 139 pounds, which over here, I have no idea what that converts to, probably like $1 million. Its ease of use is pretty simple and straightforward, almost to a fault. It's just very minimal and basic and not very fun to use or even look at. The display is pretty uninspired, but right off the bat, you pretty much know where everything is, which can be nice. It's as basic as you can get, and it doesn't really feel like there's much thought put into the design of this thing. When it comes to its utility, again, if you're making beats, you're just not going to find much use out of this thing. Most of the sounds inside of Silent are more geared towards electronic or dance in my opinion. Therefore, looking at the price and comparing it to a lot of these other plugins that we're going to look at today, I just cannot justify buying this thing at this price point for what you get. If you're making beats, that is. Therefore, I'm giving this a D ranking. Next up, we're going to look at Omnisphere, which is a bit on the pricier side. It's around $500, and this thing pretty much never goes on sale. Its ease of use is top notch. It's really simple and straightforward to find a good sound inside of this plugin. Everything's really categorized. If you find a preset that you like, it has a sort of similar to function where you can find similar sounds or presets to the one that you're trying to use, which is a really useful feature. You can easily change and manipulate the sound or preset that you're working on by just sliding a few different parameters, which is really great. The interface is really clean and understandable, which I really like. In terms of its utility, it's pretty much got everything that you'll ever need. It's got synthetic sort of sounds, it's got live acoustic types of sounds, it's got some pretty straightforward basic sounds as well as some really experimental types of sounds that you can play with. If you're ever in need of a specific sound, chances are it's in Omnisphere. Even though it does weigh on the more expensive side compared to a lot of these other plugins, if you have Omnisphere, you're probably not going to need any of the other plugins here as much. Even for me, I found I started using the other plugins in my library less and less once I bought Omnisphere, so there's a reason why this is considered one of the best plugins of all time. I am going to put this up at the S tier. Next plugin we're going to look at is Labs, which is free, sort of. They offer basic sounds that you can use for free, but if you want to buy some of the expansion packs, it can be really pricey. Some of them are like upwards of $1,000, which is crazy. In terms of its ease of use, it's pretty simple and straightforward to use, but I would say it's almost to a fault. The interface is very plain and basic and allows you to do a lot less in terms of the manipulation of your sound compared to a lot of the other plugins that we're looking at today. It's just hard to adjust your sounds to be a little bit more different in a drastic way. In terms of its utility, utility, I will say this is geared towards more of an acoustic type of library. You can find some pretty cool, unique experimental synthetic sounds, but for the most part, it's more geared towards acoustic sounds. And most of the sounds are straightforward. Again, since this thing is free, you're not going to be losing out on much. Overall though, I will say that after a while, I found myself uninstalling Labs just because I used it so seldom. Just the lack of the ability to manipulate your sounds and really be stuck with whatever it provides just wasn't as fun for me to use. Again, this thing is free, but that just wasn't enough for me to keep this installed on my computer. This might hurt some feelings, but I'm going to give this thing a C rank. Next up, we're going to look at Expand 2. This thing's around $100, I believe, but you can find it on sale pretty often. I think I picked it up for like $15. Its ease of use is pretty high. It provides you with a pretty large library of sounds and presets that you can cycle through. And if you want to manipulate those sounds, it's pretty easy to do so. It just provides you with a bunch of macro knobs that you can play around with. In terms of its utility, it's actually got some pretty great sounds in it. Especially considering how much you're paying for this thing, it's got a good mix of acoustic types of sounds as well as synthetic, basic straightforward sounds as well as some experimental ones as well. To me, if you don't feel like shelling out a lot of money on something like Omnisphere, maybe you're just a beginner and you just want to get your feet wet, going with Expand is a good idea in my opinion. So this is going to go into the A tier. Next up is Iris 2. This thing is $149 I believe, but I got it on sale. It goes on sale pretty often from what I can tell. The ease of use is pretty straightforward. It has a few presets, not too many though. And in terms of its interface, it's pretty basic and straightforward to understand what everything does. The utility though, this is where things get a little bit weird. The sounds that it provides are pretty cool, but they are a little bit more on the synthy side, a little bit more towards electronic and dance. What this thing is useful for though is sample manipulation. You can drag your sample into Iris and do some resynthesis, which is cool. So you can really experiment and push your sounds to be really unique using Iris. Overall, based on its price point, I think if you caught this thing on sale, it can be a nice little tool to use if you like to sample. But if you're using this as a straightforward synth, I would probably recommend not going for it in my opinion. It might not provide enough utility for you. So I'm gonna put this in the C tier as well. Next up, we're going to look at Pigments, which I believe is $200, but I've also seen this thing on sale for around $100 as well. In terms of its ease of use, I'm going to give this a slightly lower score, relatively speaking. Looking at this thing, it can be a little bit confusing just by looking at the interface, what everything actually does. It has a pretty unique modulation area, which can be a cool thing, but just looking at it, it can be a little bit unintuitive as well. The presets are pretty easy to use, but beyond that, navigating this thing can be a little bit difficult. The utility, though, I would say is higher than the rest. This is where it scores pretty high. The sounds and presets that come with this synth sound a lot more unique than a lot of the other synths that we're looking at here. I should say though, this does lean towards synthetic sounds, so if you're looking for a good blend of sounds, you won't find that here. But for the sounds that this does have, they did put a lot of work into it to have them sound unique and interesting, which I really appreciate. And it also allows for some pretty cool experimentation if you drag your samples into this as well, which is nice. So putting all those things into consideration, I'd probably put this into the B tier. Next up, we have Absinthe, which is also $200. In terms of its ease of use, this is very similar to Massive. It was made by the exact same people. It doesn't really have an intuitive design. It's really hard to navigate and understand what every single thing in this plugin actually does. If you play around with some of the parameters, you can get some pretty drastic effects, but having said that, to get to that point can be really difficult. In terms of its utility though, comparing this to Massive especially, this is going to rank a little bit higher. It can add a really cool texture or feel into your beat if you just sprinkle some of the sounds throughout your beat. And so because of that, I'd probably put this into the B tier. Next up, we have Battery, which is 200 pounds. Its ease of use, it's pretty straightforward and easy to use. Looking at the UI here, it's pretty easy to understand what's happening. You have whole racks of sounds that you can use. This is geared towards drum sounds though, I should mention that right off the bat. And it comes with a bunch of effects that you can add right at your fingertips. So in terms of its ease of use, it's pretty high, I would say. But the downfall of Battery, I would say, is its utility. I just think in today's day and age, this thing's a little bit obsolete. I'd much rather just pay for a sample site like Splice and just choose the sounds that I actually want, as opposed to just being stuck with a whole library of sounds and only using like 10% of them, just because a lot of the sounds in here are geared towards a lot of different genres. So at one point, this probably would be a very useful tool, but in today's day and age, not so much. Therefore, I'm putting this into the D tier. It just costs a lot and there's just much better ways to get your drums. The next plugin is Arcade, which is a subscription type of service. It's $10 a month. In terms of its ease of use, the score is really high. It's really straightforward to use. What you'll do is just go in and load up a pack. And in each pack, you have a bunch of different loops and you can easily manipulate those loops using the keys on your keyboard. It's just really straightforward and fun to use. In terms of its utility though, this is where things sort of get difficult to judge. If you're someone who's sample based like I am, this thing is like a godsend. It has a bunch of different samples that you can use for your beats, and this thing's only $10 a month. So if you're a sample based producer, I'd really recommend buying this thing. But if you're someone that likes to come up with your own melodies, you want to go down the music theory route of composition, this thing's probably going to be a little bit less useful for you. You can still use it to add little textures and noises throughout your beat, but overall it's just not going to be put to use like it would be if you were a sample-based producer. So I would say that if you were a sample-based producer, this thing would probably be S tier. But if you're geared towards making your own melodies and chords, this would probably go towards a B tier. So I'm going to split the difference and put this into the A tier. Next up, we're going to look at Citrus, which does come with FL Studio, but I'm going to treat it like a standalone plugin. Looking at the price on FL's site, it's around $150. In terms of its ease of use, this thing would probably rank pretty low. I did a tutorial video on how to use this thing, and the video was like 20 minutes long just because this thing is so complex to use. If you wanted to adjust one of the presets and manipulate the sound, there's like 100 different dials that you can play with, and it's not straightforward what each and every one of them does. And in terms of its utility, this would probably rank pretty low as well. This is more geared towards a synthetic sound, and even the sounds themselves don't sound all that great compared to a lot of the other plugins that we looked at here. And so if you were to compare this thing to something like Expand, there's just absolutely no way I would recommend using this over something like that and paying such a hefty price for it. So I'm going to put Citrus into the D tier. Next up, we have 3X Oscillator. I'll just put that right here. And we have Harmer, which is next. This thing also costs around $150, the same price as Citrus. In terms of its ease of use, this thing is pretty low as well, just like Citrus. Just looking at the interface, this thing's very confusing to look at and understand. There are a decent amount of presets that come with it, but overall just not that much, and they're not all that good compared to the other ones that we've looked at today. And once you choose a preset, trying to make an adjustment to it can get pretty confusing really quickly. Its utility though is a little bit higher than Citrus. It allows for resynthesis. I've done a few videos on how to use the resynthesis in this, and you can use it on top of your samples to really create some cool effects, so that's the nice part about this. But again, looking at the price tag compared to what you get, it just might not be worth the price tag. So I'm going to put this into the C tier. Finally, we have Sector. This thing is $139, but I've seen this thing go on sale for $50, I believe. In terms of its ease of use, this is one of the better plugins. It has a pretty straightforward and sleek design to it. It won't scare you off by any means. It's pretty easy to find a preset that you like, and you can easily change some of the parameters, and you'll know exactly what you're doing when you're doing it. In terms of its utility, it's got some pretty good sounds in it as well. It's got some pretty straightforward synth sounds as well as some unique ones, and there is a good blend of acoustic sounds as well. For its price tag, I think this is a pretty good deal. If you're looking for a synth to buy and you end up buying this, I don't think you'll feel any regrets, especially when it's at its sale price. So I'm gonna put this in the A tier. And there you have it, guys. Those are my rankings. Again, yell at me in the comment section below. Let me know how wrong I am. And while you're at it, let me know what you would rank in S tier. What's your #1 plugin that you would recommend to a new producer? While you're at it, like and subscribe. My free drum kit is available in the description box below. Join the Discord if you're interested in having your beats reviewed live, and I will see you guys next time.